Let's talk about something a lot of people try, but very few actually get results from. Manifestation. You've probably seen it everywhere. Visualize what you want. Think positively. Feel as if you already have it. And on the surface, it sounds simple. Almost too simple. But here's the part most people don't say out loud. If manifestation worked the way it's often explained, a lot more people would already be where they want to be. Because it's not like people aren't trying. They are. They visualize. They repeat affirmations. They try to stay positive. And for a moment, it feels like something is shifting. But then, nothing really changes. Or worse, things start to improve slightly, and then fall back to where they were. And after a while, it creates frustration, doubt, even skepticism. So the question becomes, why do most manifestation methods fail? The answer isn't that manifestation is fake. The problem is that most explanations are incomplete. They focus almost entirely on what you think and ignore how you actually operate, because your results are not created only by your thoughts. They're created by patterns, patterns of behavior, patterns of reaction, patterns of decision-making. And those patterns are not controlled at the level of conscious intention. They're driven by something deeper. Let's break this down in a practical way. When you try to manifest something, you're usually focusing on the outcome: more money, a better situation, a different lifestyle, and you attempt to align your thoughts with that outcome. But here's the issue. Your mind doesn't respond only to what you say you want. It responds to what feels true. And what feels true is not defined by your goals. It's defined by your past experiences. Everything you've lived through, everything you've observed, everything you've repeated over time creates an internal reference point. That reference point shapes your expectations. Not consciously, but automatically. So when you visualize a new reality, but your internal reference point doesn't match it, there's a gap, and that gap creates resistance. Not loud resistance, not obvious resistance, but subtle friction. You might feel motivated while visualizing, but when it's time to act, something shifts. You hesitate, you overthink, you delay, or you take action, but not in a consistent way. And over time, that inconsistency cancels out the intention. This is why many manifestation methods feel like they work sometimes, because in moments where your internal state and your desired outcome temporarily align, you act differently. You make clearer decisions. You take more direct action. You notice opportunities you would normally ignore. And that creates short-term results. But if that alignment doesn't stabilize, the old patterns return, and so do the old results. Now here's something even more important. Your behavior is not driven only by belief. It's also regulated by your nervous system. And this is where most manifestation advice completely misses the point. Because your nervous system determines what feels safe, not what sounds good, not what looks attractive, what feels safe. And if your desired outcome feels unfamiliar or associated with pressure or instability, your system will resist it, even if you consciously want it. For example, someone might say they want more money. But if deep down they associate money with stress, long hours, or responsibility they're not comfortable with, then earning more doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like a burden, and your system will try to avoid that, not by stopping you completely, but by influencing your behavior in small ways. You might avoid opportunities that require visibility. You might delay decisions that involve risk. You might settle for situations that feel manageable instead of expansive. From the outside, it looks like lack of discipline, but internally, it's a form of regulation, your system trying to keep you within a familiar range. And this is where manifestation methods often fail. They try to change the outcome without changing the range. They focus on what you want without addressing what you're calibrated to handle. So you end up with a mismatch, a desired future that exists at one level and a current internal state that operates at another. And as long as that gap exists, results remain inconsistent. Now, this doesn't mean visualization or affirmations are useless. They can be helpful, but only if they're connected to actual behavioral change. Because thinking differently without acting differently doesn't create lasting results. And acting differently without internal alignment doesn't feel sustainable. That's why real change happens when both start to shift together. When your understanding deepens and your actions begin to reflect that understanding. When you stop trying to force a new reality and start recognizing the patterns that are keeping the current one in place. Because once you see those patterns, you can begin to interrupt them, not perfectly but intentionally. You start noticing when you're about to fall into the same reaction, the same hesitation, the same avoidance, and instead of following it automatically, you pause. And that pause creates space to choose differently. And those small changes, and repeated over time, begin to shift your internal baseline. What once felt uncomfortable starts to feel manageable. What once felt risky starts to feel normal. And as that internal shift happens, your actions become more consistent, and consistency is what produces results, not intensity, not occasional bursts of motivation. Consistency. That's the part most manifestation methods don't emphasize. They focus on creating a feeling, but not on sustaining behavior. And without sustained behavior, there is no stable outcome. So if you've tried manifestation before and felt like it didn't work, it's not necessarily because you did something wrong. It's because you were given only part of the equation, the visible part, but not the underlying structure that actually drives results. Once you start understanding that structure, things begin to make more sense. You stop blaming yourself. You stop jumping from one method to another, and you start looking at what's actually influencing your reality from the inside out. If this perspective changed the way you see manifestation, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because in the next videos, we're going to break this down even further in practical terms, so you can start identifying these patterns in your own life and understand how to shift them step by step. And if you want to go deeper into this right now, there's a resource linked in the description and in the first pinned comment. It connects directly to what we discussed today and explains the structural side of these patterns in a much more detailed and practical way. Take a look when you're ready, and I'll see you in the next video.